something to say. Welcome back, everybody. We have an amazing guest. We have not only one of the world's best dermatologists, he travels around the world educating people, talking to people, advanced techniques, but he's right here in Calgary, and we have him right here on this podcast. Let's welcome Dr. Andrei Metelitsa. Welcome.
So nice to see you. And if you didn't say the word dermatologist, it almost sounded like you were discussing yourself. You know, you travel around the world and you teach other people, so it's basically you.
Birds of a feather, right? Birds of a feather. I'll take over the fitness world. You take over the dermatology world. We combine it. We're going to take over. We're going to take over.
Let's do it. I love that idea.
Thank you very much for taking some time out of your day. I know you're super busy and your weekends are very, very valuable. So I appreciate you taking time today. Answer some questions because I have questions around in the fitness industry for the past 20 years. I've seen a lot. I've heard a lot. And you as well, with you being a dermatologist for how many years now have you been a dermatologist?
Well, I finished medical school 15 years ago, right? And then I sort of formally became a dermatologist over 11 years ago. So I'm getting there.
Yeah, I would say you're where you are now. You've gotten a lot of places now. Are you kind of the guy that is never satisfied regardless with his business? Like even when people come up to you, and even I look up to you and say, wow, this guy is successful. Do you feel that success, or are you that guy that's always hungry for more, always looking for the next procedures, upping your game? You know, what kind of entrepreneur are you?
Well, I think the field of medicine that I'm in, this field of cosmetic dermatology, is constantly evolving, right? And so it naturally fits with my own interests as well. And it's so technologically based, right? Like my training was in lasers, and we've got so many new gadgets and so many procedures that can address things that traditionally we were always unable to deal with, right? And so in the past, like when patients or clients would come to us, we would simply tell them that it's just not possible, or they required some form of surgery. And now we've got all these innovative ideas, and it's constantly changing, right? So the things that I learned 15 years ago are not necessarily applicable now. And so it's evolving, and I love that about that.
That's so true. Like everything's changing, and even watching the news where technology is going, it's 50% scary because you know where it could go, and then that's also interesting where, you know, procedures that we thought were the end all be all 15 years ago, 10 years ago, even now, like some of the new procedures that I'm seeing on your Instagram, some of the stuff that we've talked about, and that's what I want to do. I want to discuss some rumors because what you say is very educated. You know the yes, you know the no's. You're not going to give us any kind of smoke. We're going to talk about all non-surgical procedures. Now, in Calgary, you just launched your brand new office. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so, you know, originally I did my first 12 years of medical training in Edmonton. And then for my cosmetic training, I went to Boston and I worked with some very high-end physicians and procedures, and I always envisioned that if I returned back to Canada, I would be able to launch something like that in Calgary. And then I sort of got stuck in a more conventional office in Market Mall, those of you who know Calgary. And I was there for 10 years, but I was never satisfied with the ambience or the way my office was set up. You know, we were very lucky because we have great team of people working with us and great clients, but it never felt home. And so several years ago, this opportunity came up where we decided to build what truly I consider is the state-of-the-art center. And it's definitely one of the best in Canada currently. And so that's precisely what we did. You know, we built this massive center that allows us to bring all of these new procedures to Calgary. And oftentimes we're the first ones that have those treatments.
Wow. So out of Canada, your office is kind of the premier debut, if like cutting edge technology. Now, is that something you've kind of built relationships for, or is it something where if I created with a new kind of non-surgical procedure, I'm like, okay, this guy, Dr. Metelitsa, has to review this because he is the man that will know the ins and outs of the equipment?
Yeah, I think we're just lucky because oftentimes, even before these treatments come up for commercial use, right, they need to do what is known as clinical trials and do some of the testing. And so oftentimes, many of these companies approach guys like myself to do it. And, you know, in many instances, we were the ones that were approached, like in Canada. And so as soon as these devices are released, you know, I'm given the opportunity to have them. And so as a result, it's kind of, you know, I'm able to offer what's the newest and latest to my patients. Now, as you mentioned, we're going to go through the science of it as well, because, you know, despite all the excitement, not everything that comes out is true. And so I'm very methodical about making sure that, you know, when I do put my word on it, I have to ensure that it's scientifically proven and not just some new thing that's going to die in a couple months. And I think being able to do the research behind it allows us to substantiate some of those claims a lot better.
Now, I'm really curious because looking at a lot of your Instagram before and afters, a lot of it has the natural look where it isn't from, let's say, a normal look to an extreme side of dermatology. Now, do you find that with the benefits and the curse of social media, that there's other countries that are known for more of the extreme before and afters, taking things to the level of the limits? Do you find a lot of people in Calgary are coming up with pictures and saying, hey, I want to look like this, or hey, can we do this to our body, where it's almost turning into a genetic modification? Do you find a lot of trends are kind of coming into Calgary and you push it away, or what's your thoughts on that?
You know, there's so many facets to your question, right? So first of all, I think the perception of cosmetic surgery or the field of cosmetic medicine has tremendously changed, right? Because it used to be a significant taboo, like even 15 years ago. And I think overall as a society, we accept the fact that doing some small, lesser invasive procedures to allow us not to age as fast or to enhance our appearance is socially appropriate, right? But precisely what you said, like, for example, if you compare a place like Calgary to maybe Miami or LA or some of the other cities in foreign countries, you'll notice that Calgarians as a whole, and, you know, mainly we're talking about women, they want a natural look, right? So
Yep.
it's such a dichotomy because on one hand, these are paying customers that are necessitating some form of a visible result, but yet they don't want it to be so crazy that it becomes some kind of cartoon character, right? And
Yep.
so, whereas 15 years ago, people used to ask me about safety a lot, and you know, we're worried about that. Nowadays, most of the conversation is ensuring that they don't look abnormal, making sure that it fits their face, that there's no crazy transformations, that they're just going to be a better version of themselves. And as you pointed out, perhaps in some other continents or regions, that is not the case, right? And maybe if you go to Brazil, maybe they specifically want to look modified, right? And they want that crazy look, but we're not seeing that in Calgary as of yet. And personally, I hope we never do, but time will tell.
Yeah, it's something where I even find where looking on Instagram, you see the people with more of the dramatic before and afters. And then my first thought is, what is it going to be like in public? Not when you're on Instagram or when you're in a scenario or you're seen, will you kind of blend in, but when you go to the mall or the grocery store, you know, fresh wake up in the morning, there has to come a point where they have to go, you know, did I go too far?
Yeah,
And
that's precisely that, you know, and even I, who is an expert when it comes to these procedures, I want to reach a point that if I were to look at a client and maybe not recognize that they, you know, they were my client or someone else's who has the same skill set, I should not just immediately look at a person and say, okay, you know, their under eyes were done or their lip is significantly enhanced. So the best type of work is always the one that replicates what's naturally given to us, right? Like, regardless whether you're doing it for beauty or correction or whatever it is, right? But that's kind of the art of all of this, right? It's not the procedures, it's the person who executes, right? It's the person who provides these treatments for those clients.
that's a very good point where, you know, it depends on, again, that doctor's perception, where if he likes that extreme look, he'll naturally be pushing someone over to there. But if someone wants to, like you said, naturally enhance some of the natural features to prevent the aging process, I believe, and I think majority of population would say, that's the best, where you have to guess, did you get something done, wow, you look fresh. Oh my goodness, what did you do different? Versus, ooh, what did you do? Versus, which
And
again,
I always wonder when you see like those crazy examples, and I have to admit, like once in a while, I see those people as well in my clinic, to a point that I can specifically think of a lady, for example, whose lips are so massive that I literally have to hide her away from my other clients because I'm always worried that they would think that I'm the one who did the treatment. Right?
yeah, lady.
I sound harsh, but that's the case. And she's a lovely person, and she's beautiful both inside and outside. But this one feature is overdone, and you always wonder. You question: is it the flaw and the fault of the person seeking the procedure, or is it the provider? Was it the doctor's fault?
Yep,
Because at the end of the day, once you're in my chair, I'm gonna be the one doing the work, right? And so no matter what you ask me to do, there is a limit as to what I'm going to provide, right? And
yep.
so I think the doctor is equally responsible, if not more, for those types of treatments, right? When it looks crazy.
Yeah, and it's I have a question too where I've always been curious and I've been asked this and I don't know the answer. So when somebody goes from, let's say, a contest person or a fitness person or a transformation, so somebody taking their body from, let's say, a fatter composition to a lean, obviously you can't pick or choose where the tissue comes out. Some people, like when I got lean, my face would get super lean first, and then the rest of my body would follow. Now, I've heard, and you can tell me if it's true or not, does the skin always go back? And the more that you, let's say, gain weight, lose weight, gain weight, lose weight, is that going to change the elasticity in people's skin?
It's such a great question, and I think you know a little bit about my own transformation, if you will, because I used to be like everyone else, and then when I started my fitness journey, and I decided to become much more committed to fitness, within a span of literally 3 to 4 months, as soon as I started proper dieting and much more aggressive training, my face just collapsed, right? And so it's an interesting question that you ask, right? Because while I was looking in the mirror and thinking that I looked shredded and much better, when I was going to my conferences, my colleagues were asking me, like, what's going on with your face? Because my face looked gone, right? And you don't always recognize that. And I think it would resonate with a lot of maybe your listeners and clients, right? Because I find naturally that's one of the difficulties of fitness training, right? Because you're trying to better yourself, and yet sometimes your face shows the exact opposite, right? Where you start looking aged and not so healthy. And the reverse sometimes is true, where you look at a person who is maybe more on the obese side, but their face is radiant and they don't have any wrinkles, right? And they
Yep.
actually look younger than what they are. So that's completely two extreme viewpoints. But I think that to answer your question, it depends, right? Like if there is a relative loss of weight, then with time, I think that elasticity and that collagen will return, right? But if someone truly has a transformation where they lose like 100 some pounds or more, naturally, whether it's their face or the rest of the skin, there's going to be some laxity issues that they'll have to deal with, right? And the best example is not necessarily the fitness person, but perhaps the ladies who have been pregnant, have had a relatively large weight gain with their pregnancy, and when they lose that weight, the skin does not always go back to being the same as
Yep.
it was, right? And so in those instances, they either seek expertise of guys like myself or even plastic surgeons where they need what is called a tummy tuck, right?
Yep.
But face is fairly resilient, I find, like, so if you go back to the same weight, the face returns back to normal, right? In that sense.
Yeah, and I mean, pending genetics and age and everything else, I understand that. And would you say if a client came to you and they're in the process of, on their way down, would you tell them to find their happy weight first before they decided to do a corrective face with filler or Botox or?
No, not necessarily. And I get that question so often, right? Because I see so many people, we live in an age, and you know this better than me, where everyone is constantly self-aware about their physical appearance. And most people are one way or another are trying to lose weight or maintain some kind of level of fitness. So I get this question asked all the time. They come to me and they say, hey, doc, like, I've lost 5 pounds, but I might lose another 10. Should I postpone this procedure? And so the answer is absolutely not. Like, in my opinion, it can be done at any given point, right? Because ultimately, we're not going to, number one, overdo the procedure. If anything, it will prevent them from going what I've gone through personally, where other people start giving you negative compliments and starting to say that you look, tired and gaunt and asking you questions. And then most importantly, and that's the question that I always had and refuted what my colleagues always said, if there is a subsequent weight gain, and for example, we treat them with something like injectable fillers, right, to like recreate a little bit of the temple loss or the cheek, and suddenly there's a natural weight gain, the question always was, are you suddenly going to look like this balloon with extra filler in your face? And the answer is no. And the reason for that is because we're placing the product often right on bone, so it's not just sitting on top of the skin. So with the correct placement, even if there was a reverse later on, like a little weight gain, you should not necessarily have like all this product placement protrude from their face. And that's specifically dealing with injectable fillers, obviously.
Yeah, and I mean, you've done some crazy before and afters with fillers, and I'm going to share a picture and kind of walk us through with what you kind of did and why you chose this procedure for this lady. So I'm just going to share a screen here so there can pop up there. Now,
Yeah.
take us through this before and after. Now, this is amazing. Is this, you have the mic. Talk us through this.
So this is not, like people who are familiar with injectable filler procedures, and whether it's guys or ladies, I would say that 80% of my clients are women, 20% men. Most of the time we do couple syringes of filler, right? But sometimes you have a person who is either older or has never had any tune-ups, and suddenly they get inspired and they say, make me look better, right? And so they come in, and so there's only two options, right? In the past, the only option was a facelift, right? But number one is a facelift is a surgical procedure that has to be done by plastic surgeons. If it's done well, it might look okay. If it's done bad, it'll look very obvious. It has its own complications. But the second thing is, even a facelift, it can lift your lower face, like the jawline, but it cannot address the volume loss, right? And so if you look at this lady, she's a good-looking, attractive lady, but she has aged, right? And not only does she have fine lines in her upper face, but you can see she just looks tired, right? Like any one of us who's not a professional would look at her and say, she looks a little bit tired on the picture on her before, on the picture on the left. But if you try to analyze why does she look tired, you'll immediately get your attention to her under eyes, right? She's got like the deeper circles, the creases, right? And all of that is affecting the loss of volume in her cheeks, right? If you tap her cheek, you're going to feel bone. There's no like that plump cheek that she once had as a kid. She's starting to get all these folds, and then, it's starting to sag down, right? Like, so the corners of the mouth are starting to kind of go down. She's starting to get little jowls by the sides of the chin. So all of that is kind of like volume loss in her mid-face. And even if you look at her temporal region, right, like she's a little bit hollow there. And of course, she's got some frown lines. So number one is she came to me and she didn't want to look like 30 years younger. She said, make me look better, right? Ultimately, every woman wants the same. They want to look beautiful. I think they deserve that. And they want to look fresh. So that's ultimately what people seek. But in order for us to accomplish that, we have to dissect that into individual components, right? And so in this instance, we use predominantly injectable filler with some Botox-like molecule, neuromodulator. So that was done for the upper wrinkles, but most of it was done with filler. And so we did quite a bit. We did 14 syringes of filler all at once. That's a big procedure. I doubt that too many physicians have ever done that in their career. You have to be cautious because if you put it in the wrong places, it's gonna look funny, right? But when I look at her face, I said to myself, you know what? If we place it in the right areas where she has ultimately lost her face, it will look good. And what's interesting is when they discovered like fat pockets in our face, I don't know if you were aware of that. There's numerous individual fat pockets, and they all age at different
I didn't know this.
right? Yeah, so one person might age in their fat pocket under the eye, the other one might be like in the cheek. So even within the cheek, there's like multiple individual compartments, right? And so you have to replenish those compartments. We only learned that by, dissecting people's faces in the anatomy lab, and it's relatively novel. Yeah, so this is non-invasive. She was fine the day after. She had essentially no bruising. She walked out 2 days later. Her friend said, "You look great." Nobody can quite tell exactly what's going on. She loved it. She's one of my best
Oof,
clients. Yeah.
that's
She
like
sent me a gift card to my favorite restaurant. That's how much she loved it. We put all this stuff under her, and she was that happy, right? Like, so it's pretty amazing that with the power of a little syringe, like truly, and if you look at a tablespoon, it's not a lot of product. Like 1 tablespoon is like 4 syringes, and I put 4 tablespoons of product into her, of this gel. It's not much. You suddenly change like someone's appearance and perception and all of those things. So it's pretty cool.
that is more than cool, man. That was awesome because it isn't something dramatic. Like almost someone like, oh, did you just get back on a holiday? Or wow, you look different. Like it's not extreme. She doesn't look 30 years younger. It's just she looks refreshed. And I mean, that's why I had to put that one up there. It's so impressive. And I think another thing people don't really realize is when they think of dermatology, they don't realize how many different parts of a human face that you can actually improve or do a corrective based on their perception. Where I want to share this other one, which I didn't know that you could do. And get ready for it. Get ready. Get ready.
Yeah, I actually don't know what you're gonna show, but okay, cool.
Bam! Right. So there's that one
Yeah,
where you,
yeah, this is really cool as well, right? Like, so first of all, like a lot of people are doing these procedures, right? But I guarantee you, if you were to ask a lot of these, and I call them injectors, right? Because they're not all cosmetic dermatologists with 13 years of training, right? But if you ask a lot of people specifically to name like facial anatomy, right? Something that might sound very simplistic to you. You're like, yeah, you're a doctor, you should know that. I guarantee you that 98 to 99% of these injectors would not be able to tell you what's going on, right? And so, but if you truly understand anatomic distribution of muscles and nerves, then it becomes kind of cool because you can target and correct certain areas, right? Like, so this is a very common issue, like gummy smile. Essentially, you've got a person who has a little bit of show of gum line, right? And in a Western society, it's perceived to be a lesser attractive feature, right? So in the past, you had to do all crazy things, like you had to either do a surgical procedure to drop their lip or do some kind of dental intervention, fairly extensive, or maybe even plump up her lip. But now we've got Botox and Dysport, which we use interchangeably. And literally with 2 little pokes on the side of the nose, literally 2 little pokes takes 2 seconds, you can accomplish this, right? Like where you normalize one's lip, and this lady comes to me a couple times a year, and and that's it. Extremely safe. And when they ask me, that's it. I say to them, I spent 13 years of medical practice learning where to inject, and another 10 years practicing or perfecting it. So it's all about the placement, right? So when they ask, but that was only like a couple seconds, I said, yeah, but knowledge of the placement is what differentiates people, for this procedure. And then the previous procedure, knowing when to stop is what differentiates, those of us who are a little bit more cautious from others, right? So yeah, but very simple, very cool procedure.
yeah, that was, and it's neat where like you're nailing it where someone can learn how to inject a certain spot, a certain depth, but without proper understanding of what exactly is underneath there and how it may react when it comes to problem solving. You need a professional and a medical doctor that basically has dedicated their life and understanding facial anatomy, which blows my mind. I can't even remember 3/4 what it is, but even how you explained, a cheek can have a different pocket of fat, and you can, it's not necessarily going to age the same. There's no time in an injection weekend where people learn how to be an injection specialist, or I don't know the term. They don't have enough knowledge that what if, then they're going to end up coming back to you anyways. So do you find a lot of fixing from other kind of experiences?
Yeah, so I have a couple kinds of clients. So I have the odd client, like let's say I've been doing like some kind of procedure for them for years, and then I don't see them, right? And I forget naturally. And so I've had maybe a couple dozen, and then they come back to me like a year later, and it's always a little bit awkward for them because they're like, like I've been away, like I'm sorry about this. And to me, like personally, it's the best compliment I can ever get, because if they went somewhere else and they're coming back to me, I feel that they're gonna, appreciate the level of skill and service that we can provide to them. And so I actually embrace that. Like my nurses are always like they make a side comment. They're like, "Oh, she's back," but to me, it's like the greatest compliment. But the other thing, of course, is I often have to correct other people's doings, right?
Yep.
And that's always a challenge, right? Because I don't always know what was done, to what extent. I'm dealing already with an upset client. Sometimes they have too much fullness, or sometimes they have asymmetry from these procedures. Not everything is easily correctable. We don't have magic erasers that can just undo stuff. So it's a challenge, and definitely, it's not my favorite thing to do, but I have to do it, right? Because we're dealing with people who are so affected, when problems happen on their face, right? It's the
Yeah.
most visible area that absolutely we often have to deal with that as well.
Yeah, it's because I mean I've seen some clients and I've heard some stories where they went and got Botox done and all of a sudden they smile and their lip curls underneath their over top, or they can't smile or certain parts of their face have been frozen. And I'm like, well, where did you go? And like, well, we had a big, huge party. A bunch of girlfriends came over. They had wine. I'm like, I don't know if I'd be messing with my face in that kind of scenario, even if it was safe. I don't want to be in a group. I want that person focusing on me, and I want them to know what to do in the event of something happens, right?
It's
So it's
funny, like, though, and oftentimes these are very educated people, right? And so when it comes to like a simple purchase, like when they go buy their shoes, they're gonna research it. They're gonna talk about ergonomics of like footwear and all of this stuff. But when it comes to their face, they make a phone call and they say, oh, like how much does it cost? And yeah, obviously it's Juvederm or Restylane. Like it's the product. It's all gonna be the same, and not realizing that just like an artist who is drawing is using a paint, but it's ultimately up to the artist to create the reproduction or the painting, the same applies here. Like we're using these tools, but at the end of the day, it's the artist, in this case, cosmetic dermatologist, who's going to utilize them to ensure that the result is actually natural, perfect, enhanced, but not crazy, right? And so, yeah, and unfortunately, sometimes these people learn on mistakes, and they're not dumb, they're educated, right?
yeah,
But they just maybe don't realize what they're getting themselves into.
chasing that mighty dollar. I got another one for you. Here we
Okay.
go. Here we go. Now this one's neat. I like this one because I had no idea that this was even possible. Where when I think of dermatology, I just think face. But
Yeah.
again, if you're looking at this left and right hand, now it's a natural progression where it doesn't look super different. But what procedure did you use for this hand?
So, like it's interesting. So, of course, face first, right? But traditionally, we've always mentioned that if you want to determine a woman's age, you look at her neck and her hands, right? And so the
100%.
bony aspect of the hands, we're not talking fitness, right? I know you look at the hand, you see the veins, you're like amazing, vascular, must be shredded, right? But when we're talking about aging, veins and presence of overall boniness of the hand reflects aging, right? And so we have already these injectable fillers that we use on the face. And so using very specialized straws called cannulas, we can utilize them to treat the hand. And so we use the injectable filler, hyaluronic acid, extremely safe, through a little small insertion to just lessen the extent of the boniness, right? Like on this lady's hands. And she's already an established client. She's had her face done and things like that. So it's not like her first procedure. She's familiar with that. It's subtle, but it makes a difference, right? And she's happy about it. It's going to last for a while and super safe, right? No concerns here. Very easy procedure to administer if you know how to do it.
Yeah, and it was neat that where it's very natural where some people may not even notice, and that's what I would want. Like if I had it, people would say, wow, he looks fresh. They wouldn't be able to guess. And now for this, is this something permanent? Because you hear fillers are forever. Oh my God, I got fillers 10 years ago. I can still feel it. Is most of the procedures that you do, are they permanent or do they require some sort of maintenance?
So great question, right? And so certainly there used to be some permanent fillers and even semi-permanent. I can tell you in my practice, I only use dissolvable fillers, which are made of hyaluronic acid, essentially a sugar-like substance that's so natural in our skin that is equated to youthfulness and beauty. And so one of the reasons I use it is because we have an enzyme called hyaluronidase, right? We have it naturally in our body, but we also have it as an injectable form. So number one, I deal with thousands of patients. I want to ensure that if there was any lump or bump, I would be able to dissolve it. So I have this enzyme just in case. And the second thing is, over time we age, and we don't want to age around the filler, right? So maybe today, if you do the filler, you need it in your cheek, but maybe in 3 years, you need it in your temple, right? So we want to always customize even within a certain person's face. And so in my opinion, because of that, these more non-permanent fillers are much safer and much better. They still last for about 1.5 to 2 years in many instances, right? So for example, on the hand or a lot of the times on the face, you've got a couple year mileage out of them, but they're not permanent. So that whole discussion about, oh, my filler is still there 10 years after, that should not happen with our patients.
Now, with, let's say, a permanent filler, do you find that there is a chance that your body will capsulate around that permanent filler, or?
Absolutely. Yeah, so that's a well-known complication, right? Like, so essentially think about it, like you're injecting a foreign substance, right? And so our body is very smart. And sometimes when it recognizes it as a foreign substance, it can do all kinds of stuff. It can cause inflammation, it can cause infection. And then ultimately the way the body deals with it is to create a capsule, right? Like to wall it off. But if it's done, if that capsule is very large, then you're going to start having these bumps and lumps and nodules. And that was a major complication of these more permanent fillers. Exceptionally difficult to treat, often required surgical procedures where you literally had to cut them out. People have tried all kinds of injections like cortisone injection, antibiotics to reduce the inflammation. Luckily, with the procedures we're talking about with you today, with this hyaluronic acid, we essentially never see it. Things like Restylane that have been around for more than 25 years, you can get a little swelling or bruising, but you frankly do not see that lumpiness, that's long-term that you're stuck with. So in that sense, yet another positive feature of hyaluronic acid fillers.
All right, one more, and then we're going to talk about some myths.
Okay.
So this one here is very interesting. Now, if you look at this picture on the left, now I've heard of the term, this is a keloid, correct? Is that the same as what they call it, a cauliflower ear, or?
Yeah, it's a little bit different. But like I think cauliflower ear is usually utilized in instances like sports, like wrestling, right?
Yeah.
But keloid scar, a typical keloid scar is a result of some kind of an injury, right? Now, typically in an instance of an ear, it's an earring, right? Ear piercing. And so as you can see, this lady, in this instance, like she had her ear pierced, she has an earring. But, a lot of the times they decide to get a couple extra earrings. And sometimes you get really unlucky, right? And so that injury to the skin produces this massive scar that does look like a cauliflower, but it's called a keloid scar. It's humongous, right? And so she actually had it nearly as big on the other side of the ear. And she's this petite, beautiful young lady. She's so little, this massive thing on her ear is incredibly visible. So when she came in to see me for the first time, her hair was down, like she never wears her hair in a ponytail. She's very self-conscious about it. It was years, that she's had it for. Everyone else prior to me said that it cannot be done. And the reason for that is oftentimes when you cut a keloid scar, it comes back. And sometimes when it comes back even bigger. So you cut this little keloid and then it comes back like double the size. Right, so we utilized a very special surgical procedure where I combined a little bit of surgery with cortisone injection, and another little intricate procedure where I utilized liquid nitrogen. It was something published in Brazil about 6-7 years ago, and so we got lucky with her. It's uncomfortable for a week or two. She had to suffer from some discomfort after the procedure. Literally changed her life. She wears her hair up, super happy. So major transformation. I told her to never ever get another piercing again, right? Because you just never know.
Yep.
She was not happy to hear that, but at the end of the day, we were able to make a significant improvement. There's a little scar that's left, but way better, right? Than that huge lump that you see.
Well, yeah, you look at the after, it's, the ear looks totally normal. You would never know that there was something there before. She may know, or some of her friends know, but again, the confidence that she had from, a week or two of discomfort, some pain, now the pain's gone and she just left with the final product. And I mean, it's worth it. It's 100% worth it that way.
You know, we talk about perception and like, of course, today we're discussing cosmetic procedures, but even like medical things that we see, like whether it's little pimples or acne, they do questionnaires all the time and they try to create a relative significance to a person. And it's actually incredible, right? Because they say that a person can have a heart attack and be less affected or less negatively depressed from that incident than something that's very visible on their face, right? Because we're dealing with people's faces, ears, like the central face. So you know, from an emotional standpoint, being able to change that makes a huge difference to these people.
Which you did a great segue into some myths.
Uh-oh.
Pimples.
Uh-oh.
Now, like, there's a show, I have not watched it. I have not turned it on. I see it always. Dr. Pimple Popper. You see all over Instagram where people are popping their zits or pimples, and they're getting so many views and comments.
Yes.
Now, is it actually unhealthy to spend, that 10, 15, 20, 30 where you're just attacking your skin? Is it okay? Is it bad? Is it good?
So first of all, you know, I like Dr. Pimple Popper, and I don't know if you knew this, but she actually said a hello to us. Like I'm the only person in Calgary she featured. So, you know, I like that show. I think it humanizes like the aspect of dermatology. But she does professional pimple popping, right? The problem is that many of us in the comfort of our own homes do what is known as non-professional zip popping, right? And so that is a definite no. People think it's a good idea. It's a definite no because oftentimes when you try to de-roof it like using your fingers or whatever people do at home, don't even want to tell you all kinds of
I don't want to know. I don't want to know.
right? Like you can't even imagine, like pliers, I don't know. It causes tremendous inflammation. It can actually accentuate the infection. It can cause scarring. So typically a non-professional home-based pimple popping is a no.
Yeah, which I mean, yeah, it's neat where you actually see how, let's say, a person would do it at home versus how if you went to a dermatologist. It's two total different outlooks, or even how they even look at the zit. Where we've all done it, where you get mad and you're like, oh, forget it, and you have a date or you got to go to work, and you're like, oh, I would rather a scab than a zit. Or if I just squeeze it, put ice cube on it, then a tea bag, put some salt, and then put a big Band-Aid on it, and then that's going to be better than just leaving it alone or seeing a dermatologist to treat it.
And you think that plier story was a joke, but it's not. I saw a guy with a scar on the tip of his nose, and we always have to elicit like the story, right? Like, why do you have a scar? And he said, well, I had a zit and I took pliers. And so when I determine whether a person is the right candidate for scar revision or correction, I have to assess their mental state as well. And in my strong opinion, that person was not ready for such a procedure because who uses pliers, right? But people do. So there you go. I didn't just make it up. I did not just make it up.
Like I don't know, man. It wouldn't be my first choice. I can't imagine going into the garage, looking at a pair of pliers or vice grips, going, that's a lot better than something I may have in the house.
Unless you have like a new toolkit or something like that that's completely fresh and sterilized. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, then it's okay. Now another myth. What about sunscreen? Now I've seen sunscreen from everything from 10 SPF to 100 SPF to good for 3 days. Does the number make a difference?
So there's two aspects to it, right? So number one is there's sunscreen and sunblock, right? And so we use like a loose term sunscreen, but dermatologists prefer sunblock. We like physical blocks, right? Sunscreens are chemicals. They've got like all these chemicals that absorb and prevent you from a sunburn. Sunblocks are physical, like having a barrier. The old school sunblocks were very unattractive. Like you remember on a football field, you've got these guys with like massive white paste. Like most of us don't want to look like that. The newer sunblocks are very elegant, very nice on your skin. You cannot even tell the difference.
Oh,
but they're better. So sunblock is a better choice. And sunblock should have ingredients like zinc oxide and titanium dioxide, right? So those are just better mineral-based ingredients. They're better, they're safer, and overall it provides a better protection. The second thing is to your question of the SPF number, right? So SPF usually reflects UVB light only protection. But there's also UVA, right? So we want something that's going to protect us from a broad sunlight because our sunlight has UVA, UVB, and like other wavelength of light. So that's just a UVB protection. It's just a number. The reason they started going so high is traditionally most of us never used sufficient amount of sunblock. So, they used to say if you use something like a 30, you're actually getting an equivalent of a 10 because we're not applying enough. So they said, we're going to go as high as 90. Most of the people are going to get an equivalent of 30. So overall, the higher number is better, but there comes a point where getting to an even higher number is not going to provide like that much greater protection. So we usually say broad spectrum, ideally sunblock, and something greater than 30. And the way we remember it, like when people say, like, why do I need to wear this stuff? They say UVA, A is for aging, right? So it's not just cancer. A is for aging. UVB, B is for burn, right? Because most of the sunburn happens from UVB. But together, A and B, they produce C, which is cancer, right? So that is why ultimately, prolonged sun exposure can induce skin cancer. So that's kind of like how I remember it. A is for aging, B is for burn, and together they can cause cancer. So we want some block that provides a broad spectrum correction.
Damn, I'm gonna remember my ABCs. And when I went to school, ABC was always be closing. But now ABC has a whole different meaning.
Wow. That's so many uses for that.
Sales 101, man. He goes, don't forget your ABCs.
I love
it. All right, get ready for the next one.
Uh-oh.
Now, I've heard it, and I've heard it probably in the past week, the past month, I don't even know how often. But is it true where someone says you should start all your age preventative, like your Botox and your fillers, the younger you start, the better it is, because then there's going to be less maintenance as you get older? What's the deal with that?
I think it is, and so like in order to understand it, I think we can use another example, right? So when it comes to our overall health and fitness, we don't necessarily wait for a heart attack to happen to change our life. Now, a lot of people do, right? They wait for a heart attack to happen, but most of us understand that trying to be active and eat well and exercise can potentially prevent those problems from happening in the first place, right? So preventative health is a well-known concept to most of us. But when it comes to cosmetic medicine, for years that was not the case, right? So most of the people would wait until they would become wrinkly and saggy and develop brown spots and all kinds of stuff. And then they see a guy like myself and they walk into my office and they say, fix me, right? And I have to use everything I've got like to try to correct that. But of course, the best way is prevention, right? The number one prevention we just talked about, sunscreen, right? Sunblock, because it'll prevent like brown spots and some of the fine wrinkles, but that we can take it to the next level, right? And so now with these injectable procedures, specifically Botox or Dysport, we can now start at a younger age to prevent the frown lines from happening in the first place. And I'm a very strong believer in that. And I think pre-aesthetic procedures are becoming much more popular. I'm seeing younger people. Now, I don't have to paralyze them completely. They don't need to look fake. We're doing it maybe a little bit less frequently, but it definitely is the right concept. And we're doing more and more of it nowadays.
That was probably one of the best answers I've heard from any question that I've asked anybody. That was because I like it because you have the perception of, the connotation, because everything's, as soon as you get Botox and you hear it, that you're stuck with it for life. But if, like you said, if it's like a heart attack, you use as a preventative. Again, you don't have to go extreme. You can just, again, monitor your doses, go back a little less, the frequency, where you still do have some facial freedoms. Then as you progress, you can always adjust on that. All right, sold. I like it. I like it.
Like I sometimes get clients and they come to me, right? Like obviously they come asking for questions, but then they throw something like, they're like, I'm all about natural aging, right? Like they say stuff like this, you've heard it, right?
Yep.
So my answer, and it might seem harsh to them, but I say, aging is natural, but looking aged is not natural, right? Like, there's nothing natural about that. Nobody wants to look aged. We all age, right? But there's ways we can kind of preempt that from happening at a fast pace, right? And so that's not natural at all.
Yeah. Now we're going to talk about some lips. I have a rumor. Does drinking from a straw, like you see some people that have all those lines in their lips and say, it's because I smoke or it's because I drink from a straw. True? Not true? Partially true?
Yeah, like it's partially true. So first of all, they're known as smokers lines, but luckily most people nowadays do not smoke, and yet you still see them on a daily basis. It's funny because nearly every woman after a certain age that I see is worried about these upper lip lines, and oftentimes it's like the last thing that I see on their face. Like you need, frown line correction and cheeks and everything else, but that's the first thing that they ask me about. So it's definitely a huge thing. um, I do think that, for example, drinking with a straw can accentuate it, as well as a certain mimicry or certain verbalization of certain words. So it's definitely a thing. I've noticed that men don't get it as much, right? Guys who drink with a straw don't get it as much. And I think it has to do with the thickness of this muscle known as orbicularis oris, which in men is naturally thicker, right? So I think there's multiple factors in play here, but I definitely think that like drinking with a straw can potentially contribute to that.
All right. Now, with the lips, question number two. Now, we were talking to some of those ladies that, and men, some of these ladies and men that have these very, very large lips. Now, at some point in their life, they decide that they no longer want to have these lips. Is it just a matter of fact, as the filler, it dissolves, will those lips shrink back, or is there sometimes a corrective where you do have to look at a surgical type of correction?
Well, you hope that the filler dissolves, right? But in
Yes.
many instances, the filler that was utilized on them is not dissolving, right? And then they're stuck with the stuff, right? Or they get some kind of complication, or there's so much product that's injected that it's inducing like secondary changes within the lip, right? So while we hope that with time, like after a year or two, their lip will go back to normal, it's not always the case, right? So we always caution women clients about that. The second thing is, like when a person comes into my office, because I do lip filler essentially every day, right? And they show someone else's picture, like Angelina Jolie, and they say, I want lips like this. I'm sure it's the same in your industry where someone says, I want my abs to be like that. And you're like, nope, not possible.
Yep.
You just, like, we can get you some kind of abs, but they ain't gonna be like that, right? So it's the same with the lips because different people have different structure of their lip, and some lips are so thin they can only handle so much, right? Like you cannot plump them up beyond a certain point. I find that people with darker skin complexion, like with certain ethnicities, they can handle like a little bit of a larger projection of their lip. But some of the kind of fair skin Caucasian lady clients of mine, their lips are so thin, there's only so much you can do, right? So that is why I have a variety of filler products that I use, and there's no like one treatment for everyone. I probably have like 4 or 5 different products just for lips that I utilize depending on like what we're trying to accomplish, their age and all of those factors.
Very nice, very nice, and it's good to know, like, because I've only heard a few different products, but you've mentioned where there's certain products depending on who that client is and what their needs are. So it's nice that you're able to not only customize how you treat them, but what you treat them with. Is that kind of something common in the industry, or something you've kind of take your pride on?
Well, like I'm pretty proud of that. Yeah, but like we're also lucky because as this field is evolving, right, we have more and more choices, selection tools for us to use. And so, for example, there's two main companies, Restylane and Juvederm, and each one of those companies has more than 6 different products that we can utilize depending on how deep we inject or where on the face we're treating it, right? And so within those product portfolio, there's a couple products that each company has specifically for the lips. And even between the companies, although they're all hyaluronic acid, they all vary in their firmness, projection, things like that, how much they can swell, so I can utilize those differences to produce that ultimate result that the client is wanting.
Now, in the beginning, where you're talking about how everything's kind of evolved over the past 15 years that you've been working in dermatology. Now, what are some of the new things up and coming where you're like, wow, I've been waiting for so long for this product or this machine to be available? What's up and coming for all the people looking to, doing some fine tuning on their physiques?
Well, we talked about like injectables, but there's also lasers, right? And so in my practice, I have more than 18 lasers. The reason I have so many is each device should only do one thing well, right? And so think about the skin. You have a brown spot, you want a laser that only targets the brown, nothing else. You have a red spot, you only want to target the red. You have a scar, you only want to target the scar. You don't necessarily want one device to do everything because it's not going to happen and you're going to get into complications. So several years ago, we started getting into non-invasive uh, body sculpting and fat removal, right? And so some people are familiar with something known as cool sculpting. And we were fortunate because I was the first person to bring that device to Calgary, and it's been very good. But we've never had anything that specifically targeted muscles, right? And I'm the last person to talk about a device stimulation of muscle. I heavily believe through our conversations with yourself and diet and exercise. But there's nothing wrong with having a device that can amplify that improvement, right? And whether it's muscle buildup in men or tone in women, they have finally developed something, in my opinion, that can stimulate muscle contraction. And it's known as Cutera Flex. It was just approved in Canada literally like 3 weeks ago. I'm getting my device next week. I've had my first treatment, super excited about it. Probably the most excited I've ever been in the past 10 years, because I think it's going to transform what we can accomplish.
Now we got a little footage here of
Oh,
you going through this device.
it's not
Now I'm going to
the
put up on the.
It's not me with a tan. It's just me.
So people won't hear the audio, but I want you to kind of walk through, because you can see as they go ahead and they start using the machine,
Yeah.
that you can actually see your abs. So right now, I think they're just kind of get everything set up. Now you can actually, if you can see your abs are contracting in and up. What is that feeling like, and what are they doing?
It's crazy, right? Like, so first of all, like, this is a machine that uses electrical energy. And those of you who are, for example, familiar with TENS, they were able to create a device that can amplify it by like 30 times, maybe even greater, as opposed to TENS, right? It's completely different, but within the safety measurements, right? Because otherwise, if you put too much energy, you're just going to burn the skin. And so they're trying to essentially create a HIIT, high intensity workout, right? Where you know that you cannot just contract the muscle in one direction, right? You have to kind of create a crunch and a squeeze from the side. And so they have different settings within this machine. You see those applicators. So in total, there's 16 applicators. So on me, they put 8 just on my kind of abdominal region, but you could technically put it on your thighs or butt in women's cases, or even arm muscles. And you can selectively stimulate different level of energy within each muscle. You can start with a little procedure that causes a little bit of a stretching of the muscle, and then you can stimulate with energy to cause like a deeper contraction. So when you ask me, how does it feel like? It feels like you're contracting your muscles, like you feel a spasm, right? And they can crank it up so high. Like they told me, that was the initial treatment. So I was told that the highest that an NFL football player ever went was like a 60 when treated in US. So I'm competitive. So I can go up to 65 Nate, but that was the highest out of 100, right? So you can, depending on the person, you can stimulate that level of contraction to a different degree. And then you can cause a twisting like motion as well. So the entire treatment takes about 45 minutes, and you start low and then you kind of build it up. But you definitely feel like it's an equivalent of doing a crazy workout, in this case on your abs, right? And so the next day you feel like they're sore and you feel like you've done something.
That is cool. And the fact that, even like you said, it was a 45-minute treatment, where you see these other type of, people say it looks similar to it, where 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and now you're going to be shredded. Now, an actual 45-minute workout, and you wake up the next morning feeling sore. And so what would you say would be the two biggest differences from what is that, the Dr. Ho pads that they put on, they make you do this, versus the technology that they've now released with this?
Well, major difference in power, right? Like it's amplified enormously, right? Like, so this is like 30 times, maybe even more, right? So you need a certain level of power capacity to stimulate the muscle. Otherwise, it's not going to do anything, right? So that's number one. And number two is there's been previous attempts of using other types of technologies like a magnet to stimulate muscle, but it's only in one-dimensional. As you know, you have to contract the muscle in multiple directions, so that they utilize the term multi-directional stimulation to actually induce muscle buildup in this case, right? Or toning and firmness in other cases. And so they're able, by playing with those settings, to lengthen or shorten the interval of contracture, and also control precisely where that contracture happens by placing those pads exactly on the muscles that you're targeting, right? So very selective, very targeted, high energy, and multidimensional.
So what's the perfect candidate that would want to use this type of a equipment? Who would it be?
Literally everyone, right? Like I think it's amazing. And just as a tester, I've got 35 people in my clinic, mainly ladies, working as staff. And I said, who wants to do it? And they all raise their hand. And I think it has a variety of applications. So if you have a fitness person, it's going to just take them to that next level, right? Or maybe selectively work on maybe their lower abs or some difficult to train area. If you have someone who is not as shredded, it's going to maybe give them a little bit of strength so that they can do certain exercises better, planks, etc. It might give them tone in the case of women if you treat their arms. If you've got an older person who has like backaches and does not have the right posture, you might be able to do this treatment on their back to kind of lift them a little bit and to diminish some of the discomfort that they have. So I think the application is tremendous. I think it's for everyone, but the needs are different. I think gender-based, men want muscles, women want tone, so that's kind of how I differentiate it for a person who is not an extreme fitness enthusiast, but I think it's for everyone.
Yeah,
I'm
it's neat.
excited. We'll see, right? I'm pumped about this, Nate. We'll see what happens.
First, like you said, you're the very first person in Canada to have it. It's something you've been waiting for a super long time, and you're actually active where you try it out first, so you can actually give first-hand basis of something you do want to support versus looking at a dollar sign saying, "Hey, I could make it," and not really understand it. So I really appreciate and respect that out of you, where you want to try it, and then if it's good, you'll put the stamp on it. If it's not, then you'll never see it in your office.
Yeah, and just as an aside, as like amongst the physicians, I'm fairly dedicated to our fitness goals, right? Like I eat 6 to 7 meals a day, like I work out 6 days a week, so we're very regimented. So I consider myself like a more serious fitness enthusiast, if you will. So because of that, I approach this technology with tremendous amount of scientific inquiry, right? I wanted to see the studies, I wanted to understand the technology, and I feel very firm that this is sound, right? Like that's not just some tool that makes you feel something, but after you walk out and you're like, there goes that. Like I think it's a sound device, right? And we'll see. For now, we recommend 4 treatments, 45 minutes each every 2 to 5 days, and then we're going to have a maintenance program where people might come in several times a year, and depending on where they're at, where they might do like a treatment here and there.
That is awesome. I got a surprise for you, and you don't know what's about to happen.
Uh-oh.
So, what I like to do is I like to scroll through someone's Instagram, kind of find it, because I figured if they've already put it out there, it's okay to talk about. Now, they always say hindsight is 2020. Now, what advice would you give to this man about his future, and any words of inspiration or focus would you share with him? This man right here.
Oh God.
The very first
I do
post.
not like surprises. You know that, right?
The very first post on your Instagram, you're huge into fitness. I mean, you're in impeccable shape. Your dedication to working out and nutrition is bar none top notch. But then you see the man on the left-hand side that is also very, very professional, eager, and the top of his game. So what advice would you give to this gentleman today?
So first of all, to the gentleman on the right, the advice is get some filler. That was before my facial filler, right? And that's precisely where, when I put my suit on, people would ask me, like, is everything okay, right? Because in my profession, we don't walk around shirtless. But I think the advice is, it's really hard to be a well-rounded person, right? And for all of us, we have different goals in life, right? Someone wants to travel, someone wants to become the best cook, someone wants to be the best fitness person. But I think trying to understand your own goals in life is a tremendous skill that many people are just do not have the capacity even or the time to learn. And once you understand what excites you, what gives you passion, then you should try to pursue it, right? So for me personally, fitness has become a significant part of my life for both myself and my wife Stormy, right? So we try to stick with it. I love my job, right? So I not only want to be a doctor who sees patients, but I'm often given the opportunity to teach internationally and to share kind of my knowledge and learn from other experts like myself. And so the image on the other side is me presenting at one of these conferences. And so I'm passionate about it, and it keeps me in check because I feel like if I'm at the top edge of all of these new procedures, then I can hopefully provide the best possible treatments to my clients, right? Ultimately, it's going to make me better. And then overall, we haven't mentioned it, but I'm a parent, right? I've got two little kids, and to me, that's a significant part of my life. I want to be a good dad, and despite all of these interests of mine, still have the time to come home and spend time with them, right? So that's how I feature my life. But I think for all of us, like we need to kind of learn our passions and try to live within those passions.
And that's exactly it. Like you said, you're a father, you're a husband, you're a amazing, top-notch, world-renowned dermatologist. You into fitness, where even when you travel, you have a travel meal plan. It's always, you're known to always be eating. And I don't assume it's very popular for people in your profession to have a similar physique, because it does take a strong level of dedication in now two different facets, where you're, like you have your business, now you have your fitness, and then the third one is going to be the personal. So it is a big balancing act for you, but
It's
very
right.
well done.
When we go to our meetings and they always serve bacon and whatever else, right, for breakfast. And then I patiently sit there and then they bring like 8 or 9 boiled eggs and everyone kind of stares at me. And usually it's like CEOs and relatively significant people. And they all kind of give me the look like, why is this guy trying to be different? But I think once I was able to persevere with that, like now I've reached a point where nobody questions it anymore,
Yep.
unfortunately, right? And I just show up and they're like, okay, that's Andre. He's on his program. But you can do it, right? And people always say that, they say if you travel, it's impossible to maintain that dedication. And my answer is you can, you just have to really want it, right? And if you do, then you will make it work.
100%. Well, all people need to know is, how do they get a hold of you? Where can they get a hold of you? Let us know. Let us know. Talk to me, Andre.
Well, I'm in Calgary, right? So yeah, if anyone has questions, our clinic is called Beacon Dermatology. We have a beautiful center on 17th Avenue and 31st Street. So if they type beaconderm.com or Beacon Dermatology or put my name, Dr. Andrei Metelitsa, they will gladly see them. Our cosmetic consultations are free for our patients, and then they'll come in and we'll explain to them, what we can do to make them better.
Awesome. Thank you very much for your time. This was some amazing information that you shared. We busted some myths. We talked about some new equipment coming out to help every single person out there. You're even on it. What people can expect, who are good candidates. It's not about how far you can take it. It's about how natural you can make your changes. I've learned a lot. You've shared a lot. Thank you, thank you, thank you very much for being part of the Unfiltered podcast.
Thanks so much. And it's always a pleasure to see your nice, happy face. That's all I can say, Nate.
Wow, you read that script very, very well. You read that perfectly.